How's it going, YouTube? Coming today with another video, and today, guys, what to bring to you is a Q&A. I really love making Q&As because I feel like there's just so many different questions out there in Yu-Gi-Oh! That need answers, and I love being able to be the one that can answer them for you. I appreciate each and every one of you that did send in a question, and I'm very excited to answer them for you today. If you haven't already checked out my sponsors over in Imperium Duelist and Dragon Shield, definitely go ahead and check them out. And then if you haven't already got a Where to Hand Trap playmat over on Imperium Duelist, definitely go ahead and use code GGYGO10, and let's hop right on into the video. So the very first question that I have for you today is going to be, why would you want to run over 40 cards? So I think that this is actually a very interesting question and something that we really didn't think about for a long time until the previous format when everyone was running 60 cards, right? And I'm no different. I ran 60 card striker and got 6th place at the Detroit Regional. And the reason why you'd want to do that, right, is because there's so many benefits to running 60 cards, especially when cards like Small World are legal. And I think this is really cool when it comes to deck building, because if you look at my list specifically from that event, if you didn't have Ray in your hand, which is the inherent problem behind Striker, no Ray, no play. So what I did was I incorporated engines like Souls, the Brave engine, just to make sure that if I didn't see Ray, I still had a way to play the game. Because at the very least, I can go ahead and make Verte and summon DPE and then potentially have hand traps. Because in the 60 card variants, you're typically running anywhere between 18 and 20 hand traps. So you have a lot of really cool ways to interact with your opponent. And also, again, just going back to Small World, you can go even with your sideboard, you can go Bell into Enchantress into the Game Seal, which is really cool. And it's just something that is a lot of innovation for the deck, and it really allows it to run more smoothly. And it's something that I really do enjoy, seeing the more creative 60 card piles. Of course, running 40 cards is always going to be really optimal, and then if you ever run 40 cards with Upstart, it's always going to be really good too. But I still think that there is a lot of opportunity to run anywhere between 40 and 60, or just 60 cards, because there's other ways that you can run decks too. So I think that the answer to your question today would end up just being, it really comes down to deck building and what you're trying to accomplish with your deck, and then what problems can you mitigate through the 60 card pile. The next question that I have for you today is going to be, if you could get support for an old archetype, what would it be? So I have two decks, one that isn't that old and then one that is really old. So the first one that I have for you is going to be Ogdoadic. I think that this deck is really cool and it has a ton of potential. I've seen the deck do pretty okay things as far as boards, but it's so hard to give that deck support when it already has Snake Rain. So it's really limited on what you can do for it, unless you just go ahead and ban Snake Rain and then give it decent support, which I really hope is something that happens, because again, I feel like that deck has a lot of different support cards that are already out for it, and a lot of potential. Now, as far as an old deck that just needs support, it would have to be Paleozoic. And so comparing it to something like Volcanic that also needs support, I think Paleozoic needs a Volcanic Rocket. You go ahead and like normal summon it and set a Paleo Trap from your deck. That would be crazy. And so I really love Paleozoic, and it's something that I actually played for a long time. And I think that that deck is something that really allowed me to play Striker so well, because I feel like they're really similar, right? Because Paleozoic has a card that banishes, it has a spell and trap removal, it has a Book of Moon, like it has so many different toolboxy cards. So when I saw Striker and it had the same things, but they're spell cards, I thought that it was so cool, because that way you can actually play on your turn. You don't have to like set all your cards and wait, right? So I think that Paleozoic definitely needs some kind of support, and definitely some kind of Volcanic Rocket would be sick. But that would just be me. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. Like, what kind of deck do you think really needs support? So the next question I have here is, what is your opinion on net decking? So I think that net decking is really an interesting topic in Yu-Gi-Oh! Because I feel like there's people on both sides, but I think that there's two very important things that we have to look at with net decking. One is going to be the fact that if you're newer to the game, that it's actually very beneficial for you to go ahead and net deck someone who's been playing the game for a long time, at least for a little while. And the reason behind that is because if you play someone's list, then you really have an idea as to why they play the ratios that they do. So, for example, if they're playing like a card that you would deem needed to be a 3 of, but they're only playing 1 copy, and then you play the deck and you're like, oh, it's not even coming up that much. Like, I never needed the 2nd or the 3rd copy. 1 is just fine. I think that that's really insightful for you to realize why people play the cards that they do at the numbers that they do. I think that after a while, you should stop net decking and really look at deck list for inspiration and start making a lot of your own decks, because at that point you can really start delving into the creative side of Yu-Gi-Oh! And really start to formulate your own ideas in theory a lot better and be more prepared for events because you know how to be able to build a deck. The other side of net decking that I really don't like is the fact that if you net deck somebody, especially if you've been playing for a while, then that deck that you're netting isn't good anymore, because the second that it's released, it's already bad because it was made for that specific event. Because let's say that you are net decking an event that just won a case tourney. Usually case tourneys are ran from locals. A lot of the people who play at those tourneys know what the meta is and they're local. So let's say that it was very heavy Sword Soul, and so everyone's siding the token collectors, and maybe they're maining hate for Sword Soul like Regeki, right? And let's say that Sword Soul just wasn't a popular deck, but at the specific locals it was. So let's say that you take that list to an event like a regional or a YCS, and you play against 0 Sword Soul the whole day, but that deck list was made to beat Sword Soul. Do you see what the issue is? It's really something to say that if you are going to get a list and use it, that you have to start thinking about ways that you can change it to really be able to fit the event that you're going to, rather than just using a list that was specifically made for a very specific event. So yes, I don't think that net decking is that bad. I think that it can help, but I also think that there's a lot of reasons why you shouldn't net deck. Moving on to the next one here is, what's the best way to learn decks and combos? So I think that this is a really interesting question because I feel like everyone learns very differently. So I think that the best way for me to learn is just by using a deck in like a solo mode that I've never played before and never even read a single card. Because that way you're learning what the cards do as you're interacting with them, and then you can go back to deck builder and really be able to know what cards can come out and what cards need to go in. Because like, let's say that you, in testing in like a solo mode, you're learning the cards for your first time and you find a card that you're like, wow, I really need to be able to get to this card is broken. Then you can go back to deck constructor and start really knowing, okay, I need to find ways to get to this card. And then you can kind of go back and forth between like a solo mode and your deck constructor and really start to interact with the deck and learn what your ratios need to be. Because I feel like if you build the deck prior to and then you test it, you don't really get the same feel as to if you played it first and then went back and tried to build it. That's just my take on that. That's how I typically go ahead and build decks, because I just find what cards are more important that way. So what are your favorite cards? I love this question because there's so many different cards out in the game that I really love hearing what other people's favorite cards are. So my favorite have to be Magician of Faith, Grave Robber, and if I had to pick a third, it'd be Copycat. So I love these cards in particular just because of the art, and I really love old cards. So I actually just recently got into Goat, and I love Goat so much. It's a ton of fun. So definitely Grave Robber, because I'm getting the character of Grave Robber tattooed on me, which I think is going to be dope. It's going to be a really cool tattoo. But these have just got to be my favorite cards, especially because even like Magician of Faith, like back in the day, that card's insane. Being able to get back a spell was actually just broken. So I really like this a lot. I think that these cards are really cool. Again, this is another thing. Let me know down in the comments below what your favorite cards are. I'd love to hear. So what's the bare minimum for a deck to be competitive? So I think that this is a question that we have to look at other aspects before we answer it. What makes a deck competitive? So I think that's going to be the better question here. And that's going to be, what deck can utilize the best cards of the format the best? So if you look at cards like Scythe, Snow, we see one of the best decks of the format being Punk Synchro. And that deck really does utilize Snow and Scythe. So I think that's really cool, and that's something that you can kind of just do in a format where you can go, okay, what are the best cards? And then you figure out what decks can really use them the best. Because let's say that you pick a deck that can't use any of them. And then you just got to realize that that really lowers your ceiling as to how strong the deck can be. Because if there's already these really insane cards that are running the format and your deck isn't running them, then maybe you should be considering not playing that deck and playing a deck that can use them. So as far as what's the bare minimum for a deck to be competitive, I would say it's whatever decks can at least run the cards that are really running the format. Moving on to the next question here is, how do you know what to search with Engage and send with Hayate? So I think that this question is going to be very based on the situation, and it's very hard for me to answer this without knowing the board, the graveyard, the hand, but as a generality, you have to realize that Striker needs a couple things every single game that you play. You need a way to break the board. You need a way to swing the card advantage in your favor. And then you also need a follow-up turn. And then you also want to have a way to Ray at all times. So the really cool way that you can go ahead and play through hand traps is sending with Hayate. So if you haven't revealed to your opponent that you open engage, and it's turn 2, you can Hayate attack, and then if they don't do anything to Hayate, you can send Widow Anchor, and then you can go ahead and go Kagari and try to add it back. And so that way you can draw out the Veilers, the Imperms, especially if you're playing against like the control decks. You would then send the Burner, because you got to send whatever card is going to be more impactful that they really don't want to be in rotation, right? Because Engage is just searching the card that's going to be the problem for them, right? So like Burner would be a problem for control decks. So you can go ahead and send it, and a lot of times that'll bait the Veilers or the Imperms. And then what I'll do at that point is go end phase Shizuku. Even if I do have Engage in my hand, I won't reveal it. And then they'll usually Veiler, Imperm, or Ash the Shizuku. And then on the follow-up turn, when you have Engage, you already drew out 2 hand traps, you're up in card advantage, and then you should just be winning that game anyway. But as far as sending with Hayate, it's always based on the deck that you're playing against. Anything genuinely, you can use the Widow Anchors. Shark Cannons are pretty good depending on what it is, especially if it's like Despia. And then for control, you just send Burner. As far as what to search with Engage, you really have to start thinking about what the situation is. Because if you're playing against like Despia, then typically the first Engage you want to search a multi-roll, and the second Engage you want to search Shark Cannon. If you're playing against like Punk Synchro and they have a Scythe Engrave, I'm absolutely just going ahead. The first Engage searching like Burner, clearing the board. Second Engage searching multi-roll, activate multi-roll, end phase Shizuku, add Shark Cannon, banish something from the graveyard, reset Shark Cannon on my opponent's draw phase, activate Shark Cannon, reborn their Scythe, and Scythe lock them. So it really depends on the sequencing on what you're trying to clear. Because, again, you really want follow-up and you really want to swing the card advantage into your favor. But if you have a way to turn skip, then I'm always going ahead looking at my opponent's graveyard before I engage. Because if Shark Cannon's the better card, which sometimes it is, if you reborn a Punisher against Punk Synchro and it's huge, there's no way they out that card, and it's better than Mystic Mind. Because they have 0 outs to that in their entire deck, which is crazy. So I think that's really funny just to be able to use their own cards against them. And then also, if you're in a weird position where like you have nothing on board, you don't have multi-roll, and there's just nothing that you realistically can do. If there's like a Baron in your opponent's graveyard, a lot of times I'll just go end phase and I'll search Shark Cannon, and then I'll just reborn Baron, and then at least I have an Omni negate. And then I've had times too where I'll reborn Baron, negate something on their turn, comes back to my turn, I'll go standby phase Baron, reborn Ray. So there's a lot of really cool things that you can do in interactions with decks like that you're playing against. Especially the Baron play is so cool. But it's always very dependent on the situation that you're in with this. What's your favorite format? Eternal. Eternal format's fantastic. Thunder, the Orcus deck, and Striker. It was so much fun. It's just so cool, honestly. Like, it was triple engage. We had a ton of mind control. We only had 1 anchor, which was kind of unfortunate. But, like, the format itself was a ton of fun, and I would love to go back and play it again. So the next thing here is, do you think Tearalaments can compete with Splight? I think that Tearalaments are actually going to end up being the better deck. I think that Splight right off rip is going to be really insane, but after the format gets really figured out, we already saw in the OCG that Tearalament was overtaking Splight before Toad got banned, so I think that Tearalament's going to end up being the deck that's going to be the better deck of the format personally. What bothers you in Yu-Gi-Oh! The most? So I actually had to think about this question for a moment because I was like, what would it have to be? And I think that it would have to be results-based testing. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, if you are trying to help somebody with a deck list and you see a specific card that just should not be in the deck, right? And then you ask about the card, you're like, hey, like, why are you playing this? And then the answer is because of this specific duel and this specific day and this specific time, and it's never been relevant again, but if this one specific interaction comes up again, I want this card. That is results-based testing. And so that's something that bothers me a ton because I feel like that is something where we talk a lot about tunnel vision, and a lot of people ask me about how you deal with tunnel vision, and that's going to be very co-linked to results-based testing. And that's something where, like, let's say, for example, right, you're playing against, like, Dragoon Turbo at locals a lot, and then you go to a regional. you can side in main cards to beat the local scene that you have because you're expecting to play against those decks. That's totally fine. But then if you go to a regional, you got to realize that those same decks usually are never going to be there. So it always is going to change based on what event you're at and where you go. So results-based testing is not the best, and it's really something where I recommend that you show your deck list to other people that you have in your circle and really get their opinion, because sometimes you are so focused on certain cards that you don't realize that they're actually just might not be that important. So moving on to the next question here is, what are the supplies you need to start playing? I would say you need a deck box, you need pen and paper. If you have a calculator, I recommend it, a play mat, and then I always just like having a field center. You don't need it, but the field centers are cool. And then also just getting packs of sleeves. So if you haven't already checked out Dragon Shield, definitely go ahead and check them out. But I really do enjoy the game a lot, and I feel like just having all of those just really make the game go a lot smoother, especially a pen and paper, so you can keep track of the life points and have a log of those. What's your thought process on how to deck build for the meta? I feel like I explained this a little earlier, and essentially it's just realistically just going to be, what are the strongest decks in the meta, and then what are the best cards in the meta, and then usually I'm building a deck around the best cards, and then just kind of realizing my side has to alter and maybe my main a bit if there's a deck that I'm just having a really bad time against. Like how in Despia format, just not too long ago, everyone was main decking Triple Crow to go ahead and deal with things like Branded in red. There's nothing wrong with altering your meta to go ahead and deal with a certain deck that's giving you a ton of problem, as long as it's very prevalent. So as far as like thought process for deck building for the meta, just really got to look at what decks are the strongest, what are the counters, and then also what are the best cards in the meta at the time. So if you haven't already checked out my Twitter, Twitch, and my Discord, definitely go ahead and join those. Links in the description below. And then if you want a coaching session over at Metafy, definitely go ahead and check it out. You can PM me on Discord if you have any questions. I really do hope that you enjoyed today's video, because there's just so many different questions that I don't get to answer all the time in different videos, that I really love making these videos just to go ahead and answer this for you. I hope that everyone has a wonderful night, and I'll catch you all in the next video. Thank you.